All right. Okay. So I have three of you on the call for now. I think this is just from, oh yeah, from YouTube. All right. Good evening, everyone. You can drop a message in the chat if you can hear me. Yes, Oluwafemi, good evening. I hope I'm audible. I hope you can hear me clearly. Please confirm if you can hear me clearly. Let's see. All right. Kindly confirm in the chat if you can hear me clearly, please. Thank you. So we're simply going to continue from where we left off yesterday. Um, yeah, I was able to explain a couple of concepts, and I believe. Oh, nice, nice. Okay, I believe we are clear on some of those foundational concepts. Some of these things you're seeing on my screen, from the HTTP verbs, the JSON payload, the resource, the endpoints, right? Yeah, we understand what REST is. HTTP, and of course we also understand the flow of these requests heading from the client side to the backend, right? So what we are simply going to do today is to build a very simple API that we can use to create some resources on the backend, and also fetch those resources or get those resources from the client. All right. So with that said, I would simply start off by creating a new project. So let's just say npm init. So we're going to create a new project here. um, yeah, I think there's a mistake. The mistake is I did not create a directory for that project. So I am going to remove this package.json file here. Let's create a new directory. I will call that CRUD application, CRUD app. Okay, so now I can navigate into the CRUD app and I can say npm init-y. So I have my CRUD application. One thing I love to do for sure before building any system is, do some foundational design, right? Now, the thing is, at this level, you probably would not see the relevance of creating what we call architecture, right, for your projects. I can actually show you, yeah, let's see. I can show you an example of how you use those kind of diagrams. Of course, I'm going to teach you guys, and I'm going to also, share some of those diagrams with you when I have some, when I have some. So basically, when I have some, tasks, right, that I want to issue to you guys. So you see, I'm currently using a website called plantex.com. This is basically a website where I can put in a description of what the flow of my application should look like, right? And if I share that with you, at least you will understand what service is calling what service, right? This example is not very clear, but I can show you a simple example that I have right here. So let's see. I think I should have like a template for my architecture. Okay, and I have sequence template right there. All right. So this is a very simple example, right? In this example, you will just see a very simple flow. So this is an example of what I can, share with you when I give you some tasks. It would make you understand, what the process should look like, right? The business process, the actions that I expect, right? So you see, I have a customer, I have, an internal, I call this an internal service, an order processor service, and a database, right? And from here, I can simply, show you or tell you that I want item A to communicate with item B. Now, I don't want us to dive so deep into this, but I want you to understand that probably in some of our sessions we'll be having, I'll be coming alongside, diagrams. I'll be coming with diagrams, like this, right? I'll come to the sessions with diagrams like this, and we'll basically follow those diagrams to build our backend system, so that you get to see what the standard process of engineering would look like, right? Following the architecture shared with you, and converting that architecture into actual code. Okay, so we're going to be looking at some of those things. Let's go ahead and open up this project in VS Code. Let's open up the CRUD app project in VS Code. Let's close this for now. Okay, so I will also zoom in so that you guys can see this very well. Let's create a file called server.js. I think that's a mistake, so let's fix that mistake. Server.js. Okay. All right, so now we have the server.js file. I am simply going to, set up our base express, our base express, I would say the boilerplate, right, that we need. Of course, you can simply grab that from the documentation. So I'll just say const express equals express. Remember, we have not installed express in this application just yet. So I have express, I'll say const app equals express. Let's initialize that. So I can also say ports equals 3000, right? Just like what we used yesterday. And I can also say app.use express.json. So we can accept JSON data like I explained yesterday. So now we can have some endpoints. So let's just say we have some of these routes. So endpoints. Okay. So the first route I have here would be a simple get, right? So we'll have our request block. That should be a comma, our request and response block. Okay. And in here, I can simply put my arrow function. So this is basically our first endpoint. So we just need to test this, to see that this is working. Let's use a status of 200 and the JSON objects. So this JSON objects, we can simply say response equals. Now, one pattern I advise people to use is probably have a different function you can use for your response. So you can have a function called this response. I mean, there are different ways to build this, right? But I usually, advise folks when you are sending a response, you understand what the shape of your response should look like, right? So I can simply say the shape of my response should contain a status and a message, right? Probably without the code, the status code. I mean, we would include that here. So we can have just the status and the message. And of course, I can also decide to, add some details here. The status is a string, right? And, the message is also a string. It makes sense because when you are about to use this, by the way, let's just say return status equals that status, just like this. And you also have message. Okay, so when you are about to use this in here, right? When you're about to use this, one thing you will see is if I call response, you see I have that function, with the description, the params, right? And I can also proceed to explain, right, what some of these things are. Let me see. Okay, just hold on. All right, so we have the param status. I'm sure I can add I'll probably add some comments here if I want to, right? I'm sure I can add some comments here if I want to, but that's not necessary for now. I can add some comments so that when I'm using the response object, I will be able to see, what these items, are used for, right? What they stand for. So you see I have status and message. All right, so I can simply say, for my status, success, right? Remember, I taught you to also use true or false, so we can simply use a boolean for this, right? So I can say boolean, and when I use this, it tells me that okay, this guy is actually a boolean. So I can say boolean of true, message of successful. All right. So let's just go ahead and test that. That should be response or status. Okay, so this is good. Remember, you also have to launch your Express application. So we can do app.listing and we can specify, first you have to specify the port, right? And you have to put in this, callback, right? And within the callback here, you simply need to yeah, basically you just want to put a comment, right, that says, okay, this is currently running, at least so you can identify that this is running. Of course, it's not, necessary to have a comment, right? It's not compulsory, but it's a good one to have, right? So you can at least see that in the log. Okay, so we can say console.log. Um, let's just say our app is running on ports, and then we can put in the ports here, right? So we can have that port here. I should run our application by simply using NodeMon. We installed NodeMon yesterday. So NodeMon, we installed NodeMon by saying npm install -g NodeMon, so that we can actually have our application running. And then when we also make changes to our code, right, it restarts automatically. Okay, So that is why we're using NodeMon. I already have it installed. So if you don't have it installed, go ahead and install NodeMon. Let's just install Express because we don't have Express. Okay, so let's install Express. Also, if you are about to use packages, which of course you would see me use, right? But let me just show you how to use a very basic package. Remember the other day we built a QR code, system. I showed you how to actually use your Node.js and your npm packages, right? So we actually saw how to install packages and build simple application. But of course, we did not make an API call whatsoever, right? So I'm going to show you how to install, the same package we used that day. And this time around, we'll send a request from our client, which is Postman, to the backend. And by sending that request to Postman, you will see that we will be able to create a very simple, QR code data in our application here. I will also try another example where I would use a Vue.js application. It's going to be very, straightforward, right? Would make a call to the API from Vue, and would also you would see how we are able to create that QR code as well. Okay, just to see if this is working. Let's just say NodeMon server. All right, so this is currently running, but I would prefer to actually run this from the terminal so we can have it, side by side, right? So let's reduce the size of this guy for now. Let's just say NodeMon server. So you see we have our application, we have our server running right here, okay? All right, so if I simply make a call, an API call, just like what we did yesterday, if I make an API call by saying call, let's just go to the desktop, okay? Call localhost, which is the base port. I get, status true, message successful. We simply used this function to achieve, that, okay? So of course, this is something you can simply put into a different folder. I usually call the folder utils, right? It's a utility function basically. Okay, I call it maybe like response.js. That's just an example, by the way, right? And you can also choose to export this. So I can say export.response equals, right? So I can choose to export this so I can, access it from a different, location, right? So from our server.js, I can simply come in here and say const response, right, equals require, and I can, bring in that file from utils. I'm sure you know how to import already, so this should not be new to you, right? If you don't understand what I did right now, just point that out in the chat and I would explain again. But we are simply accessing this function from this file. Okay, so our application is still running. Oh, we have an error. So let's see what exactly are we getting from the error. It says unexpected token. Let's check out the file and try to figure out what the problem is. Yeah, so we have an error here. Let's save that, and our application is running now. I can run this again and our application runs smoothly. Okay, so for now we just have the base structure, something very simple. We are going to simply install packages and build a simple QR code application for a start. See how we are able to send requests into our backend and have that request perform actions on the backend. After that, we'll proceed to build a CRUD endpoint, right? Endpoint where we're able to perform actions like create a record, update a record, delete a record, and also fetch a record. So I'm going to look at the chat now if we have any question. Please drop a message in the chat if you have any questions based on what I have done so far. And I think I need to take off my image from there so you can see everything clearly. All right, do we have any questions? Based on what I've done so far, do you have any questions? All right, let me know if you have any questions before I proceed. If I get just two people respond, I'll proceed, right? If you have a question, let me know in the chat. Just two people, go ahead and drop a message. The imports. Okay, yeah. So for the imports, let's take that again, right? Let me bring that back here so we can look at it again. So basically, we had a function here, right? This is the function, okay? And of course, you know what this function is doing already, right? We're using this function to act as a way to respond, to our clients that makes the call, right? We just want to make sure things are structured, so we don't have to write, this object on every single endpoint or every single resource here. Rather, we are just able to, call a function to do that. Okay. Someone said, why didn't we use the normal import syntax just like React? Oh, yeah, because we are currently using CommonJS. Okay, so you need to note that this is CommonJS. Okay, so someone said, why do I get the suggestion to use ESs after importing? Yeah. This is okay. So you see, I also have that, that recommendation here too. Okay, what we are using right now is CommonJS. You would see this on so many documentation, and it makes sense that you understand that you're using CommonJS, not ES6, right? If you're using ES6, then you start, doing things like, import Express from Express, right? You do things like you do things this way, but right now we can't use import. If I try to run this with import, I'm going to get an error, right? So if you check here, you see it says cannot use import statement outside of a module, right? If you want to be able to use import statements, then you can simply come to your package.json, right, and set a module true, right? So if I set module of true, let's see if that is correct. That's supposed to be, just want to verify that. I don't think is it module true? I think I have to verify that. Hold on, give me a second. Let's see. I think it should be actually. Yeah, package.json module. Okay, I think it should be module. Oh, okay. I think I get now. I get that now. So yeah. All right. So when you actually try to set that module with using the module keyword, you can actually use that to set that I want this particular file, I want this particular project, to be a common to be what's it called, an ES6 type, right? So there are two options, and I'll get to show you this one. But the first standard that we see, what we see people do most times is they just easily change this to MJS, right? This automatically gives you, that module. But of course, you have to run this again. This time around, you say MJS, and this is already defined. So if I take this off, let's go back again. So if I take that off, you see I can simply use 1 minute. Yeah, I can simply use the other pattern, which is import. But then even your export option has to change, right? The way you basically export. If you are working with module.js, the way you export changes because this is no longer going to be supported. Using that exports that we have here, this is no longer going to work, right? You have to use a different format. So what we'll do is, we'll get back to using ES6, right? I'll show you how to use ES6 and how to set up ES6. Previously, what we use is CommonJS, and even till today, a lot of people still go with CommonJS, right? A lot of people still go with CommonJS. So, but at the end of the day, it's I would say it's actually optional, right? If you're working on a project where you have you know a lot of people that prefer ES6, which I would also recommend that you use ES6. Most of the time, if you're building something new, right? It's a new standard, so it's a good one if you go with ES6. Okay, but if you also get to use projects or to work on projects with people, where you see that they use CommonJS, it makes sense that you are also able to utilize CommonJS, and you also know how to export or import or use the required keyword when necessary, right? Let me check the chat. If you have any questions or you don't understand that, I'm going to show us how to import and export again in CommonJS. And I think we've done some of these things before as well when we're doing front-end development. So yeah, I think we've done this before. So let me check the chat. Okay. So yeah, as I was saying, by the way, you are either going to use that option that I mentioned earlier, right? Which is using the MJS option that I set here, right? MJS means module.js, right? You're going to see a lot of people use it. Or you just proceed to set that in this package.json. So it is not module, true, right? I think that was the mistake I actually made earlier. It's not module true. Sometimes when you have yeah, when you're doing things, you might end up making similar mistakes. So you can simply look up any documentation and quickly fix that, right? So basically, what you set is not module true, but it's type of module, right? So when you set the type of, I mean, you saw the error here. This shows that this is not valid, right? So it says value is not accepted, blah blah blah, right? So I was initially thinking it was like a Boolean value, but then I just totally forgot. It should be type of module, right? If you set type of module, you no longer need to put .mjs. You can just go with server.js, and you can simply proceed with the regular import statements, right? Just like this. Okay, and of course this would not work anymore, right? This pattern doesn't work here, so you probably want to take off export. Export will not work. Exports will only work in common JS. So for now, let's just take this off. We'll get to the point where we have to use that. We would also go back into package.json, take off the type of module because it has to be common JS. So if you keep that type of module here, it won't work for you. Yeah, so let's take that off. Regarding the question about the export again, I can simply move this file out of here, right? Why am I moving it out of here? You don't want to put all your main code in one single file in the Java in the server.js file. We want to have some level of separation, right? So I call this a utility function because all it does for us is decorates the response, and it returns that value to us, right? So I can simply grab this function. I can come into this file. I created a file here right inside the utils folder. Okay, and I also made it exportable, so I can export right now. And of course, there are other ways you can also export. Remember, you can also decide to go the route where you say module.exports right equals response. Okay, so this works. This also works. If you have seen code like this, these options work. Okay, I just prefer to use the export dot because it's a single function we're trying to export. All right, and back inside our server.js, I have to import. So I have to import. Yeah, almost making that mistake again. So response equals, and I just bring that in with require. Okay, utils and response, right? And add.js, that's optional. Let's take it off. But you can put that right there. So now we have the response working again. So this can be reached, as you can see. When I hold down the control key and I click on this, it takes me to that file. And yeah, we have this working again. If I come back here, you see our application is also running. It says we have an error. That is because, let's see where that error is coming from. Probably, yeah, I have to stop it because remember we ran that code with .mjs. So let's change it and use .js. So as you can see, our application is running one more time. And of course, I can verify that by simply by simply using the call command here again. Okay. Remember, you can also test that from the browser. So localhost 3000. So you see we have that JSON response. Okay. All right. So this is the point where we decide to build our actual. This is the point where we decide to build our actual CRUD application. So, oh yeah, sorry, I mean our QR code application. Right, let's start from there, and I'm going to be fast. So I hope you guys understand. Export has S, like you wrote exports. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Because we're trying to. Okay, let me go back. Let me go back here again. So exports, we're trying to export each function, right? So you can actually go with this exports. I can write multiple functions and export them this way, right? So just in case you haven't tried that before, um, okay, I can actually write multiple functions and export them this way, or I can choose to just use like const, const, and of course const, and I can export module.exports equals um, request response and payload. Yeah, so maybe you're familiar with this, guys. Maybe you're familiar with this. This works, right? And the other option works as well. Most times I find myself using this option. Anyone can work, right? So anyone you prefer to use is fine. Okay, hope that answers your question. All right, so hope that answers your question. Let's proceed. All right, so this is what we are going to do, right? Just to put some level of context here. We're going to be able to send. We're going to be able to send our we're going to be able to send data from our clients. So this guy right here is our client, and on the client end, we want to be able to send a request that would contain maybe the name of the person and probably the department of the person, right? So the name, let's say employee name, right? So let's say employee name, employee department. Okay, so we want to send this record from the client to the backend, right? And we have the backend sitting right here. So let's just say this is the backend. So we have the backend running on localhost 3000, and we say slash register. Okay, so we're going to build a simple app that we can use to register employees. And when we send that record, to the backend, we want to be able to hold on a second. Yeah. Okay. We want to be able to, use that data to generate a QR code that will probably be added to, the QR code will be added to the, the employee's badge or ID card. Okay. So this is the backend. So you can call this the client, the server, right? So we have that request. This will be wrapped as a JSON object to be sent to this guy. This guy will then create the QR code and store it somewhere. Okay. Of course, you can go as far as even using it to generate the ID card itself, right? For example, when we issue out certifications, we have a simple software where we put in the information of the student, we send that request to the backend, and the backend basically generates the certificate, right? We even went as far as building a very simple Python application that we use for generating testimonials. So what we do is we pass in all the files into all the testimonial feedback into an Excel sheet, right? When we upload that Excel sheet into a directory, the Python application picks it up and it uses that particular item to generate testimonial images, right? Flyers basically. So we designed the HTML code, we designed all those stuff, and when it generates the testimonial, it uses the HTML that was actually assigned to that project. So the point is, if you understand this concept, you will be able to do some of these things, right? These are basic applications. All right, so now we have tested this and it works. What we need to do right now is work with a post request, or let's keep this, let's keep this as is. Let's just say server is reachable. If anybody should visit this, is reachable. Okay, so we can just put, yeah, we're going to have a different endpoint right now. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to include app.post. So this is basically what will accept uh, our registration. So I say register, okay, and then I would have the request, the response objects. All right. So here I will start by saying, request dot body. I want to basically grab the item that we take from here, which is employee name and employee department. I would say employee name, employee department. All right. So what are department? Department. Okay. So this is what I want to do here equals constant, right? So I have this, item that will be taken from the body, right? And I will simply start by saying console.table. Let's just have these, let's just see what the record would look like, right? So request the body, all right, and then this is what we would use to create our QR code. So probably at this point we want to say npm install QR code. I remember showing you how to check for the packages on npm npm.js, so you can simply check that out as well. Go to npm.js.com. I think that is the URL, npm.js.com. I can search for a QR code package. By default, this QR code that we find that we'll see here, I think that will probably work for us. QR code. Hmm. Okay, I can only see. Oh yeah. An error. Okay. Yeah. Was wondering. Yeah. So this is the library we are about to use, right? And we have examples on how to use it. So it's pretty much straightforward, right? You see, we have examples. We want this not to be a terminal item, but an image, right? So we can scroll down to see an example of where they use this to actually generate an actual QR code. Okay, so back into the util section here, I can actually write the code for generating that QR code. So I can say, const QR code generator, and this is basically the function I will use for generating the QR code. So I expect data to be passed in here, right? Data in this case is just going to be like a bunch of strings. So I can also put I mean this is me advising you to learn how to put proper comments this way so that when you're using these functions, you can at least have some definition. Okay. So the data should be a string. We want a string. We can decide to also pass an object, and that object will be converted into a string here, right? So we can simply say JSON.stringify data to convert this into string, right? To pass this into JSON into a stringified data. So we can say const, stringly data. Let's just call this stringly data. Okay, that is just a random name. Okay, so we'll call this stringly data. Now we can also decide to say const QR code equals require QR code, right? Because we have installed QR code. Okay. So the function we need to use here is a QR code dot to file, right? So we need to actually, you see, this is an example of why we should, put this type of comment, right? You see, the way we're able to figure out what this should do, right, is because they've put the right, set of comments. So we expect to have a path, okay? We also expect to pass the string, right, which is that stringified item. So we have to pass the path here, and then the stringified item can simply be called stringly data, right? This is basically all we need for now to be able to generate that QR code, right? Now for the QR code generator, we have to basically export this as well because we're not using it in here, okay? And for the path, we have not specified a path, so we can start by saying const path equals, probably put in the path. We can simply call this like file. We don't really have that folder for now. So what exactly can we do? Maybe just, keep it, let's just leave it empty for now and see what that gives us. This should save directly into, the path here. We will definitely set a path for it, but just to see what the file would look like, right? We say QR code dot to file, and we expect that to be created here. Now we need to set a file name basically, right? In order to keep that file name unique, we're simply going to say every record that we're about to create, we want to have a unique ID. So this is where using a library like UUID comes in, right? So we have to install npm install UUID, and we have to also import it here. So I will say const UUID equals require UUID. Okay. So now that I've installed this, I can simply use this to generate that file and that file name, and I can proceed to say I want this to be .pdf, of course, or .png, sorry, .png. So let's go ahead and add .png. This gives us the actual file name, right? And this is the data that should be contained inside that QR code. So we can just go in here and also drop paths without specifying a folder whatsoever. This actually works for us. Okay. All right. So now that I have this, simple function created here, of course, I can choose to return. I can choose to return true if this is successful, right? It also makes sense that you have some, try catch block here just in case, you have some error. So you can put in a try catch block. Let's move this out. Okay, I would say catch error. And I'll just, yeah, I can throw that error. If we have an error, you can throw the error, or you can choose to throw a particular message, right? I can say throw new error, and I can simply say I add a message to say QR code generation failed, right? Or failed to generate QR code, failed to generate QR code. All right, so this is what I have, and of course you can check to see that our application is still running. Someone is asking, what shortcut are you using to do the docs for the function? Oh, it's not a shortcut, it's basically this comment, right? JS doc, right? It's basically the comment. So when you set the proper comments, if you're about to use the function, just like I'm about to use this function right now, you would see that, you see, we're able to use it, but first we have to import that, okay? So let's go ahead and just add that import here, QR code generator. So if I call QR code generator here and I hover on this, you see I get the data, right? It says data is any. I don't think that is correct. So let's go back. Let's go back to see this. We're expecting, yeah, we're basically expecting a string. Ideally, this is supposed to be an object that would, convert into something else. So I think we'll have to specify object properly. That should probably be capital letter O. Let's verify that to see what we have. This is not okay. This doesn't give me the right. Hmm. Let's see. Let's see. So if I set string, what do I get? Data string. Okay. Okay. So I get data string. Um, yeah, so I can simply choose to pass this in as a string, but of course, I am passing this as an object. I guess that is why it gives me any, right? I want to pass the whole thing, not just one. So I can simply pass the whole thing here. So I probably don't even need to do this at all. Okay, except you want to do some verification. I'll probably show you how to do verification, right? So right now we're not verifying the data, so we should verify the data. That is something we need to do, right? Uh, Hold on, let me just set this here. So we should verify the data. It's important to verify the data. So we're simply going to come back here and verify that data. For now, we're just calling this, passing the value here. We're going to get a response eventually, right? So const response equals this. Our response is meant to be true, so I can simply say if response. If I say if response, it means I'm saying, if we get a true, value returned, right? So I can say if response res dot, status. Let's start with that. Should be 200, and then I can say dot JSON. So this is the point where I can also use my response object that I've created before. Remember, we already have the response object here that we created. And I can say the response, the status should be okay or true, right? And then the message should be QR code. Uh, yeah, what should I call it? Okay, generated. Let's just say success, right? Success generating QR code. Okay. All right. So this is what I have. If it's yeah, if this is true, right? And of course, I can simply say else. If it fails to actually generate the QR code, let's also have like a graceful failure here. So I can say, yeah, we can say 500, which is internal error, internal server error. So this is false, and then we have an error, right? So yeah, now we have a function that is able to generate the QR code here. So we can simply say this function generates the QR code, generates QR code, and it will return if it's true or false. Okay. So if I call this now, let's quickly pull up Postman, right? Let's make that request with Postman. Is there a package like Python, Pydantic that we can use to validate data in Express? Of course, of course. I mean, it's. I'll be honest. I think it's easier in JavaScript, to do some of these things, to achieve some of these things. It's way easier. I would show you how to do that. Very similar to Pydantic as well in Python. Yeah, all right, so I'll show you how to do that right now. Basically, I have Postman coming up. So we are going to test this endpoint. We're going to send in that object. So what we expect to have is that the object at this point will be stringified, and a QR code will be generated for us to file. So this is the point where we generate the QR code. Now the thing about that QR code that is being generated, we did not pass in the UUID if you remember. Okay. So what we can also do if we want to pass in the UUID is to simply say data.uuid equals this value, right? So let's start by saying const generated ID or unique ID equals this, right? So we can simply use this unique ID in place of this now, and we're also sure that the unique ID will be added here. Let's just say data.id or employee ID. So we're going to have a record added to the data at this point, which is the employee ID. So we can say add the unique ID for the employee. Okay. And we also stringify, right? So this converts our data to JSON string objects, right? A string, yeah, let's just say to string. That makes sense, to string. And this is the part where we can say we set the path of the file, right? With the name.png, right? And at least just to be sure that every single record will not have the same file name, right? So it's expected to be unique. One thing we can do as well is to, probably just remove. Is it called remove? Replace all, and we can replace. So there's a way to basically remove all the hyphen we get from a UUID. Just to show you what this would first give us, let's go ahead and test this with Postman. So if I say slash register, right, which is what we're trying to do, we're expecting we're expecting the object, employee name, and the department. So let's just quickly put that here. So we have employee name and employee department. So department, I can say computer, I can say IT department, and the name I can say marvelous. So one. All right. So if I send this now to that endpoint, so it says true success generating QR code. If I come back here, you see I have the QR code generated right here. Okay. And of course, if you scan this QR code, you get to see the content that includes that ID. I usually like to check, to verify. So I can say QR code scanner. All right, so we should be able to get a QR code scanner on the web. I think this is probably trying to load a camera. I don't want that. I just want to, you know, just upload a file or something. There are websites. Yeah. So I have generate, so I can simply screenshot of this here and drop it in here. Doesn't seem to move. Okay. So you see, I have the employee name, employee department, and then I have the employee ID with that ID that was generated. Okay. At this point, I can also decide to say, oh, I don't really like the hyphen. I usually don't like keeping that hyphen in there. So the problem as well is that in this particular file, I am putting QR code generator into a file called response, right? So maybe what I can do is to call this an helper file where I get different helper functions. And of course, I have to then change it here as well. So this changed automatically, so that's fine, right? So inside the helper, within this function, I can just say that replace all. I want to simply replace all the items with that hyphen with just nothing, right? It's just going to be empty. If I proceed to test this again, right, this time around, let's go to the API. Let's go to Postman. I'll say marvelous. Let's just say John Doe, just to show that it's a different record. Okay, John Doe, and John Doe is probably in the sales department. If I should send this now, I still get a success response there. I can come in here to see that new item that was generated here. As you can see, this does not contain the hyphen like the first one, right? So I can also upload. So let's see. Oh, I think that picture is gone. Let's try that one more time. Take a screenshot. Okay, back to this and right, upload. Okay, so now you see we have John Doe, right? We have the employee department, the sales department. So basically, you see that this works, right? Someone asked a question, if there's a way we can also do validation. Yes, there's a way you can do validation. There are libraries to do that, but I'll just show you a simple library from here. So we can simply go back to npmjs.com and yeah, we can just search for Joy. So there are so many of them. I love using Joy. It's pretty fast. We have Zod, but Joy is good object schema validation. So we can simply install Joy. It's quite easy as I mentioned, right? So we can simply come on. I don't want to sign up. I'll go back to this. All right, so I can simply install Joy, npm install Joy, and I can utilize the code from here. So let's just go to the documentation and API. So we can simply grab a sample code that we can use. Okay, so as you can see, we have this is basically how you use Joy, right? So for validation, you can set up a middleware for this, right? Instead of having to do it in here, but we don't have a middleware for now. So let's just set up the validation. So um, validation setup. right? So we're setting up validation. So we import joy. We have to set up a schema. So our schema would look like this. But I mean, we have a lot of items here. We don't need all this, right? So let's take all this off. We just need yeah, we don't need all this. Come on, we don't need all this. Okay, so let's take that off. Yeah, so we can actually set to say something is required. We expect a minimum, maximum. You see, you can actually set how you want the data to be formatted, right? So this is for username, but we can change this, of course. Instead of username, we want this to be employee name, and then we have another record there, which is employee department. So employee department, we can say we want a minimum value. This is a string, of course. You can set it to a number, boolean, or something else. Okay. So employee department, we don't need a max for some of these things. Some people's name can, of course, more than 30 characters, right? If you want to set a max, you can do that, but it means you have to also be in conformity with the max you have on the UI. Okay. So yeah, let's close the object. Okay, let's close the object. So now we have the schema. Let's call this our employee registration schema. Okay, that makes sense. All right. So now that we have the schema, the next thing you need to use is the validate function here, right? So you can validate the object you receive alongside the schema, right? So you can simply say schema.validate. It takes that particular schema and it uses it for the validation, right? So we can grab that. Let's throw that in here. So this is the point where we probably want to perform the validation. By the way, I noticed that we always use console.table for our object. So you can see we have that console.table item here. Okay. So let's go back and paste this. So we have that employee, okay, dot validate, and in here we can simply say request the body. All right. So I mean, what would the result look like? Let's say console.log, or let's just say validate equals let validate equals okay. Let's schema validation equals this, and we can say we can log the schema validation just to see what we get. If it's wrong, if it's right, you can basically see that. So if this is wrong, let's say I pass in, I go without the T, right? If I go without the T, of course, you can actually get to see the error. If you check let's go into a terminal here, you get to see we have an error, right? Okay, so you get to see we have an error, and it says let's say we want to get the detail, right? Okay, so we want to get the detail. Let's just go ahead and yeah, but basically we have an error. That's what you see. You are able to check, right? So it says validation error. Employee department is required, right? That is the error we get. The department is required because we actually set it here to be required. Okay, but then what came in was not department, so it was able to verify that, oh, we were expecting the employee department, but we didn't get it, so there's an error, right? So you can simply say if you have an error, from here, right? So if you have an error, you can track what exactly that error is, right? So you can say if you have an error, do this. If you don't have an Of course, if you don't have an error, it proceeds, right? So if you have an error, just go ahead and maybe return, dot end, right? Or you can say dot, JSON. Start with, yeah, probably you start with the status. Remember, I showed you that if you get something that is not correct in terms of the object, you can return 442. 442 here, basically stands for saying this is an unprocessable, entity, right? And you can say return a JSON object, tell us what is the response. The response is false, right? And then the message is, you can decide to grab the message from here actually. So you can say you want to take the exact message, schema this dot error dot message, right? And that would give you the message, right? If this happens to be an error, you get to use this object, and this will be returned at the end of the day as the error that you've gotten, right? So yeah, you can basically do this, and it works perfectly. Okay, so you can do this and it works perfectly. If there is no error, then it simply has to proceed. There are other ways to also structure this code. As I mentioned, there are other examples that you can as well, decide to use. So you see, we have status false, right? Message employee department is required. Okay. I think someone asked that question. Hope this makes sense. Onyenike Chukudi. So there are other ways you can decide to actually structure your code. You can structure your code in such a way that you can reuse this. As you can see, this is not very reusable. I don't like writing code this way. This is not reusable. So you can actually set this and make it reusable, where you simply have to call a function. When you call that function, you probably pass in the object, right, which is your request.body, and then you pass in the schema, okay, so that you can use it everywhere without having all this, okay. So you can write a function that you call for validation, right? You can simply say const validation. You probably just expect, yeah, so you probably expect the schema and then the body, right, or the objects, okay. So when I say objects, let's just say data object. The object you expect, from the user, right, and then the schema that you've set, okay. So if you're doing something like this, it means it means what you want to do is grab this code, right. Let's just grab the whole thing. Just grab the whole thing. So if you drop this here, you can basically say, I want to use this schema. So this is the schema we're working with. Dot validate the data object. So this is you reusing code, so you don't have to, repeat code here and there. Okay. So now we are validating that data object, and if there's an error, this is basically what we return. But of course, you don't return RES. You don't have RES here, obviously. So this is the point where you basically throw, right? You throw. So you say throw error, and that's a throw new error. What is that error? That error is simply going to be schema validation dot error dot message. Okay. Do we have that message? We don't have that message. Let's figure out why. So this equals this. Okay. Validates. Mhm. Okay. So I'm sure this would also work. We don't have that message because we're doing some level of abstraction here. So we can simply say the schema should actually be uh, yeah, I'll just keep that as an object. The schema itself should actually be an object. The data object is also an object. So we're expecting two objects. You can add some description, right? You can add some description of what this should be. So I can say this is joy schema, okay? And then this is data object from the client, okay, which is kind of like the JSON, right? So these are JSON objects from the client. So if I decide to use this validation, remember I can actually move this code into a different file just to keep this place neat. I love to do that a lot, right? I love to do that. But first, I want to keep this code here so that I can use it when I come back. So I can move this away from here, put that into like the helper file, okay? And then I can also export this, using exports. So now I have the validation code that I can use. Remember, you have to also import joy because you don't have joy imported there for now, including your schema. So I can import joy into the helper. Now in our helper, we probably don't want to keep, oh, I need to use this. Give me a second. I need to use this. All right. Okay. So we probably want to put joy in the exact place where we have our schema. So what I love to do at times is to probably have a schema, right? A schema file, which I can put in a different location. But I'm just going to drop it here. So at this point, I will import joy, and I would also import the schema that I need to use, right, for that verification. So I can drop it in the schema file. So there I go. There we go. We have joy, and then we have the schema, which of course you can also export. It's good to actually have this level of structure where you are able to break down some of these items, right? I have the joy object here. I'm exporting this guy already. So within my server.js, I don't need to write all that code inside this a controller file, right, or inside this controller code. All I need to do right now is just import validate, right? I think it's called validation. So let's see. I'm not very sure again. Let's say equals require schema. So we need to bring in the schema file first because we have to bring that in from here. So I can't remember the exact name, so I'm just doing some guesswork, and I think that is it, correct? Next, I need to also bring in the validation item itself. So I would say that should be a helper. So I can just come in here and use validation. Good. So it's still in the same helper, right? And this is our schema. So inside my code, I can simply say, um, validation, and this is the point where I can pass in the employee registration schema and the data object, which is request.body, right? So I can say let um, yeah, I can simply call this in here without even passing any other thing. All I have to do at this point is just and I would have preferred to call this validate. Okay, so name your code properly, please. Validation sounds weird, so I can call this validate, right? I can make this asynchronous as well if I want to, right? I just have to set some, async code here, which is not very necessary for now. I'll show you how to do that in our next class. It's pretty straightforward, but I'll show you how to do that in the next class. Okay. So I need to name this correctly, and that's what I'm trying to fix. Validate, which makes more sense, right? If you call it validate. So when we also import this guy, we say validate. Okay, good. So here we can simply call validate. We pass in this and that. Okay, the body. If there's an error, it's going to throw an error. So if there's an error and we don't have a proper try catch here, our code is going to crash, right? So if I test this, let's see what happens exactly. So you see our code just crashed here. It said employee department is required, and because of that, our code crashed. Okay, because we don't have a proper. I mean, remember we threw that error, right? So we should have try and catch so that we'll be able to catch, that error. So we can say catch that error, and of course, this is where we can now have the res dot status. We can also decide to pass the specific, error code when we throw that, error, right? Or we can choose to check, if this is the type of error, this is what you should use for status code. But that would be a lot of ifs, and I don't like, writing a bunch of if everywhere. So you can actually decide to, design this particular function to also carry, code, right? If you want to. Okay, so let's go back to the server. I have res.status 500, just to say it's an internal error, internal server error, and I can simply say my JSON is going to work with the response, and of course, for that response, the status by default that is false at this point because it's going to we're referring to the error we have here, and I can also say what am I missing here now? So the message now can be error dot message. Okay, so if I save this, let's first take a look at what's going on here. So this is running properly, right? If I go back in here and I run this now, let's see what we get. So we get a standard error, employee department is required, right? If I correct that and I run this, let's see what we get this time. Success generating QR code, and then we have our QR code generated and shared here. Just to confirm that the QR code is actually being generated, let's delete everything. Let's delete all those files and let's generate a new one, right? So you see we have that new QR code generated. If we make a mistake in the object and I send, let's see what we get. So it says status false, employee name is required. Let's come back here. The first one was correct, and as you can see, we have that QR code. We don't only end up having, good and clean code. Of course, this is not clean enough because, we did not really, write some, proper comments, right? We don't have proper comments here, as you can see. We are now doing verification, so we can actually, take this comment off. We don't have proper commenting here. It's good to always write nice comments, clean comments, so that when people come down to your code, they can easily understand what you're trying to achieve in here. But then you see, we simply have a very simple, controller file. We don't have a lot of things happening here apart from doing the validation. I would also teach you how to move validation to a middleware. So you can choose to separate this and perform validation on a route level before you even get into the controller. At that point, you realize that the only code you find yourself writing inside the controller is just this and probably this if necessary. But this can also be abstracted away from here, right? So your controller looks simple, very simple. You have, some of your helper files, you have the schema, quite simple. And then you have maybe a repository file that you use in saving your data to the database. Unfortunately, time has gone far. I really wanted us to look at, how to create a CRUD application and probably give you a very simple introduction to, databases. I also felt, that maybe we could build a simple UI for making this request to the backend. I know most of you would want to see how that is done. How can we have a UI, maybe a React or Vue UI that can simply collect this information, right? This information we have right here, and then send this request to the backend. I mean, it's pretty simple. In terms of the API code itself, Axios Postman generates the Axios code, or it generates the API request code for us in multiple languages. So we can simply grab this and make that API call straight from our front end client. It's not complex in any way. But when we have the next call, or probably by Friday, if we have a workshop, I will show you how that is done before the next class on Monday. All right. So I know this might look like a lot. Try to go over this video again, and I'm sure by the time you also have access to this code, you'll pretty much see how easy it is to set up some of these things. The functions are not asynchronous, as you can see. In our next class, I'll make sure that the functions we write are synchronous, so that we can also implement some asynchronous patterns here, right? Of course, this is not important because we are not using an asynchronous validation object in the joy on the module end, right? If you check the schema option here, sorry, if you check the helper, the validate helper, we are not using our synchronous option. We actually have validate, I think we have validate async, right? If you check the documentation, we have validate async, but we're not using that. Instead, we're just working with validate for now. So by next week, we'll definitely get to see how that works. And of course, I would advise that you also explore how to use some of these packages. What we did today was pretty simple. In the next class, we'll look at actual CRUD application and basically working with MongoDB, right? And yeah, please remind me so we can also create a simple application so I can test this with you. For those of you that want to, watch me create this view application and post this particular record to the backend, remind me on Monday so that we can get to do that together on the call. Do have a wonderful evening and yeah, good night.